Well, hello everyone. Here to talk about right here. I'm talking about agendas and plans and other sorts of events that are going on our schedules, right? And a lot of times you're always worrying, oh, too, is that when we do make plans and set agendas, that's basically thinking ahead of time, ahead of schedule, toward it, just to kind of give your mind enough thinking time to just think about the things from what you really want to do and the things that maybe that need to be set and planned ahead of time, stuff like that. But like everybody else might even say too, that if we were to actually do the studies about the typical language, study right here, as to where that what does it usually mean, and you can maybe even put this in alphabetical order here, but or something like that. But I tell you one thing, though, to everybody that you want to know too, that you got these two sentences, these two questions right here that are placed into sentence, right? And so a lot of times it sure seems that way that why do we make plans ahead of time when things change? When things change, and if you want to put like a comment right there, and also why do we even make plans ahead of time when things change? So it sure seems that way that if you were to go ahead and maybe put that comma quotation or something like that. So it sure seems that way that that each time we were to write that down into like maybe like a sentence fragment it is, and you're always also wondering though too that when do we think about that to where that becomes a compound question compared to what you calls like you're just thinking about it, you're just thinking about it. You're not really actually. I'm like, yeah, you really are not doing anything yet, but you're just thinking about it. You're some sort. But a lot of everybody else might even say that. When do you think that you would say even? And so I'll just right here. I'll go ahead and just and put this. Like if I can just do like this. That won't even be a complete sentence if I do that, but. Yeah, highlight all that right there, and I'll just say copy right there. A copy, and then I can just paste that, just showing everybody here how that works right there with the copy and paste. But I tell you one thing, everybody, that every time we think about that question right here of talk about why do we plan ahead of time even though if things change. And if you want to put like for sentence 3 right here, even though or maybe even if, even if, or what if? Even if or what if plans change. So that's not really a complete sentence, right? So a lot of times it seems like that the action verbs and then the pronouns and maybe the sentence fragments or like that. So a lot of times, every time we think about doing any sorts of spelling and grammar, though a lot of times you're always warned to where that there's a difference between that whenever a question appears by the mind, or maybe that it all comes by the groups, that there's different groups of different punctuations, right? So a lot of times, every time we think about the source of writing and language, though, that if it's really about the fact about these words go by different categories, right? And so every time you're always warned to where that whenever you do ask the question, Noah, are you really talking to somebody who's reading, or are you really just think I'm just kind of generating ideas, just being thoughtful as to where you're just kind of getting some ideas, some clues, and like anybody say that's just typically how the brain works, right? And so a lot of times it seems like, and I can be honest with everybody here that the way the way that mind the way your mind works, I can just say that the way the mind works is that your about your thoughts, your thoughts and your thinking, your knowledge. I usually call it the knowledge, but every time we think about that though, and you're always want to know too that that how is it that do we necessarily think about to where that a lot of our thoughts are being kind of like translated into like a question mark. And a lot of times you're always want to know too that every time you think about it, it becomes a question, right? And that's why it sure seems that way, that you're always warning toward it. You put a question mark at the end of the sentence right there, and you're always warned toward it. That was not a question at the beginning. That was just a thought. That was just something that you were thinking about before it became a question. And before you start out the sentence by saying, "Why do we?" or "Why do us?" or something like that. Why do we or why do us or something like that. But you're always want to know too that whenever you do first start talking and writing about something, that you're always warned toward it. That number one, whenever you do plan ahead of time, that gives you more time, right, to be thinking about. Okay, that you thought, like, that whenever you do first start working on something, that planning ahead of time would give you at least, the common sense toward it, the things that you want to talk about, the things that you want to discuss, maybe during the meeting, right? So the first thing that I was thinking about too is really about the ideas. The thoughts and ideas. So it sure seems that way that those are kind of like, up, and like, like everybody else might say that the thoughts and ideas, that they're just really they're there, but it's like, so a lot of times it sure seems that way that, even if you are in a meeting and you're always warned toward it, that you remember talking about something, but what all has been getting done since then, since the time, and you're always thinking that if you were to put that into a complete sentence though, it seems like that the question mark does not start until about whenever it comes to plan, your plans ahead of time or something like that. So at the time, if you were to look back at a complete sentence, a lot of times, you're always warned to where that you had to include a sticker between these words just so that way, like everybody else, or maybe you 102, maybe maybe that the heart symbol or something like that. I'm like, well, really, if you're chatting with somebody especially, but still, it's like people might even say that why is it that what do you really even call that when we're talking about that you want to go ahead and put a thought into a source, a question. You want to kind of paraphrase that into a question mark. And a lot of times it sure seems that way that, you would thought that, your thoughts would be about, information that's coming to your mind that you're actually writing down, right? You're actually writing down those thoughts and those opinions, right? And every time you think about that, you're always warned toward that, your opinions, your opinions are not really coming from the feedback from the class or something like that. What they really are coming from is just that the person, the person who's writing, the person who's speaking. I'm like, if you're just, you're just thinking, right? But you're taking down notes. A lot of times people say you're just taking down notes, but don't you think that that whenever you do think ahead of time, that gives you enough time to, like, like everybody else might say that that there might be a number of reasons why you think about that. Like say that well, things change. So you want to go ahead and put this, like everybody else might say that if you were to go ahead and write down a sentence like that, and you were to think about that, to where the things change. So why would you want to plan ahead of time if things change? How many of us really would like to have an answer to that? But it sure seems that way that people might say that, well, during the time that we were actually were thinking about the agenda, or that it was just like before we have more members come into our group. I'm like, so it sure seems that way that's usually what people have to say. That colleagues and members and So when we were first talking about that we had only maybe 3 members in our discussions here talking about that, and now we have maybe close to 50 of them joining our discussion. So it sure seems that way. That planning ahead of time, I guess, is real good. Just because that kind of gets you the thoughts and ideas about what you want to do and how you want to arrange everything, and so it sure seems that way. That that's usually what a lot of people have to say is that do you think on average that the job's going to get done if you have at least one person doing the coordination about, doing the arranging, and as well as is thinking about it as toward that, I'm gonna, I feel better to do, much rather to just at least do something rather than nothing. But like everybody else might say, that the first thing that you really are doing right now is taking down notes, right? You're just taking down notes and maybe starting out with smaller pieces, and you're thinking as toward it, well, really, that some of that stuff is useful and some of it does not. But I think a lot of it has to do with testing, and I can tell everybody here too that based on my experience, it seems like it's all about the testing. That you may not use everything that you're doing, right? You may not use everything, and that's why it seems like that. You're just really just to kind of study and just understanding about how it's working and how things are going, and what have you learned from what you were working with, analysis and all. But still, everybody else might even want to know too that why do we even if what if makes plans ahead of time, and quote is toward it that when things change and question mark. So why do we think that we would want to put that, like anybody else who maybe want to know too, that it sounds like to me that those wordings were taken apart or re-proofread or anything such as the compound sentences, to where that it's not really a complete sentence right there. That there was there were times if you were to actually test this right here, if you were to actually test your knowledge, and let's just say if you were to be writing down in a complete sentence about why, and maybe put like an extra, like or like something like a apostrophe or comma right there, or something like that. You put your why right there, and then do we or do I, and then the people might say that if it's a thought, for sure you wouldn't want to say I. You say I right there. Why do I? And before other members join the group, that you would say we. So really, that it's not really a complete sentence, but half the time it sure seems that way. That whenever you're trying to piece together these different pieces of the puzzle, and also whenever you're trying to, whenever you are trying to think of a point of perspective to where that something seems to be a lot easier than what it, but still. But at the time, it sure seems that way that you want to ask a simple question. Well, you're not going to always get a simple answer either. And I was also thinking too that in case if anybody were to ask me that parents might even say too that to their children that should we ask questions that you don't want the answer to. So if you were to actually put that into a complete sentence right there, and you're always want to know too that do like a comma or something like that. So a lot of times it seems like that when we do get into these discussions, a lot of times, and it sure seems that way that there are more questions than answers a lot of times, and it sure seems that way. That's usually the case, right? That there are more questions than answers. There are more questions than answers, right? And that's why it sure seems that way that do you like a bit, but so half the time you're always want to know too that if that's the case, then a lot of times you're always warned toward it. What do you call the answers? You're always want to know too that how really I'm like, could you possibly work that out toward, yeah, well, if you come up to a question and let's just say that you would put something like, NA for not acquirable or something like that. A lot of everybody else might say that you would really want to answer that to a question on an application, maybe if it does not apply to you, and a lot of times that's usually the case, it does not apply to you, or that's up to you if you want to answer that question. But at the time, you're always want to know too that if you're trying to make plans to work on something, work on a project, or work on an assignment, or trying to complete a training or something like that, or maybe making plans for the holidays, a lot of times, like everybody else might say, that even parents might even want to know too, that have they really have gotten a clear answer about why should we make our plans ahead of time whenever things change. And it seems like the best answer really is toward that what have you learned, since you asked. And could you maybe look at it that way? What have you learned? So yeah, what have you learned since then, since you asked? So let's just say if it's been, I can maybe put that into like a little scenario, but let's just say 5 days. I'll just say, yeah, 5 days. Most of the time, it's usually 5 days. Put that in like equation or a scenario. So a lot of times I'm like, yeah, people might say that really, do you want to go ahead and put it like that? Or if anything, might say that, yeah, well, really, that talk about typical data science, so that it would be like your apprentice year or something like that. But still 5 days, or if you want to, maybe use equals or something like that. I'm like, how do you want to go ahead and word that right there, and maybe put underscore or something like that right there. I can just put on here that 5 days. Yeah, 5 days. It's been 5 days since you asked that question, and you're wondering, what have you learned? And so a lot of times it sure seems that way, that every time we think about that, though, and you're always warned toward that, the original idea that you were thinking about while you were looking at a clock or a calculator, and you're always warned, too, that glad that you mentioned, but at the same time, it sure seems that way, that you were not even this idea did not come to your mind until you were looking at a puzzle. You were looking at a puzzle piece, and before you were thinking about all that other stuff about you were actually working on the puzzle before this idea came to your mind. So a lot of times it sure seems that way, that planning ahead of time means that you're given your mind a typical thinking toward it, that you're able to at least think about, okay, yeah, you got an idea, that idea is in your mind there for the first few seconds, but then it just slips your mind, and you're always on, oh yeah, I forgot what I was going to say. And so a lot of times it seems like that that do we kind of if you want to kind of put that into like a point of perspective right here, to where that sometimes you are able to remember, and sometimes you are able to get some real good, clear facts about what you want to talk about. So that's why, let's just say that it was not the first sentence, but maybe the second time that you were thinking about that the first thing that was coming to your mind was about is toward that, 5 days, that that's something that you were thinking about, that you meant to write down, and that you're probably thinking that, okay, 5 days. But you might even want to know too that if you were to actually put that into a test right there, and want to know too that it didn't take you 5 days to come up with those agendas, it actually took you only 5 minutes. So if we were to actually put that to a test, and you're 102, that why is it that you're getting different results whenever you do put that to the test. And so it sure seems that way that almost every conversation I've had, it seems like to where that yeah, maybe that's another reason why that maybe not everybody's going to give a simple answer is because if you were an actual scientist or an archaeologist or maybe a therapist, then maybe you would have a lot more information about that, and maybe that you would say is to where that the fact of the matter is knowing as to where that you think about what all that you've learned since you asked, and maybe you should put that into like an agenda to where if you would actually set a PowerPoint file to where that you actually record a lot of that analysis all together into a simple recording, right? And it's a lot of times everybody's going to say is to where that whenever you ask the simple question, that you're going to say is to where I want a simple answer. That simple answer, of course, is not going to be explained very well. So it sure seems that way that you're always thinking too is toward about the knowledge. It's like, yeah, not explained very well. Yeah, I don't get it. I don't get it. I don't understand. What do you mean? So a lot of times it seems like that. Yeah, do you is that really like a point of perspective right there? So if you were to write that into a complete sentence, and at the time you always want to know too, that why is it that a lot of things that we talk about, you're trying to put this into a complete sentence, or maybe if you're trying to put that into a question mark, and you're always wondering to where that maybe the reason why you can't really plan ahead of time is because that you just need. I'm like, yeah, you need some time to think about it and all that, but still that really is it really meant to be a question, or if it really about the fact about it's really supposed to be another way of a typical mind teaser, and it's also another way, if you want to cause, is to where that that somebody's just testing you. Yeah, they really are just testing you, and I just really think that people should look at it. It's more of testing. It's supposed to test you, physically. Like if you are a doctor or a nurse or a pediatrician, you really just need to think about that. It's supposed to be about testing your knowledge, right? It's supposed to be about testing you, and so I just really think that since the last time you asked a question, and a lot of times it seems like that. Yeah, well, what if they look at that transcript and they see that a lot of typo errors and maybe a lot of mistakes that were made from before? And so it sure seems that way that every time we think about that, though, that we're talking about, mistakes that were recorded, or maybe, information that was, provided. And let's just say if we're talking about maybe an HTML document or something like that, or any source of a file, document, and you're always worried toward it that people are going to be able to see that, especially on the transcript. So you're always worried, too, that that is all that is all just too embarrassing. Really, I'm like, yeah. So, and I know a lot of journalists would even say too that whenever you're going to be working on something, that maybe a lot of the information, even if it is confidential, that maybe some of the information is provided, but then some of the information that is not provided. And so that's why it sure seems that way, that when we do want to ask the simple question, that you're always wondering toward that, you make plans ahead of time, but it's like, yeah, you want to go ahead and just say that, yeah, but, and people might say that you would really only need to say that if you're going to be responding to somebody's message or somebody's letter, but half the time you're always want to know too that yeah, that at the first time you asked a question, you did not get the same response, from the second time that you asked, or something like that. So it's like, that could also be about somebody else talking, or yeah, somebody's trying to remember, that conversation from earlier or something. And but I tell you one thing, everybody, that each time we think about that, you want to go ahead and maybe put like a sticker right there. But it's like, yeah, that so you really want to ask, like everybody else might say, that that's another reason maybe why you want to put a space right there. You want to put space right there, and you're thinking as to where, yeah, you put a question mark and then put space right there. Put a space and then a double space right there, and so like everybody else might even say that you would have double space for that reason. Not just because that you're using up space, or like everybody else might even say that you would use different signs and symbols to where that two or three people talking at the same time or something like that. But it sure seems that way that we just don't really know who's really all talking. But let's just say that if you were to start the conversation like that in 102 about how many people are in this conversation here, so you really just don't know until you actually until you actually are able to open up the files that show the discussions and everything. And so that's why it sure seems that way, that every time we think about this, that really that it all goes by the recording of the thoughts before it becomes a question and before it becomes an opinion, right? And that's why almost all the time that you're always warned toward it. You plan 5 days ahead of time for that reason. Is because of all the information that you're able to gather, and you're always warned to where that things do change, right? But at the same time, that it's all about testing your knowledge, and it's also about how much. It's all about putting it to the challenge too. So it seems like it's all about putting that to the challenge, and really what. People might say that there probably is a better answer to that, but it's like really that. So a lot of times, every time we think about that, though, and you're always warned to where that things do change, even if you plan ahead of time. But it sure seems that way that if you're going to be in an actual meeting talking about stuff, that you remember stuff, right? So it seems like that, you know. Maybe it should always be about the fact about that you remember, that you remember stuff. So that's why it sure seems that way that you remember stuff, and that's why it sure seems that way that whenever it comes to about the fact about you remember stuff. You remember stuff, and that's why that it's like whenever we do talk about is to where that whenever it comes to understanding about whenever it comes to talking about things, and maybe whenever it does, I'm like what happened when at least that when we do learn about things. So a lot of times it sure seems that way that every time we think about that, though, and you're always warned to where that you ask the questions a lot of times, but it's like you're always warned, hey, you may have the answer to that conclusion, you may not have the answer to that conclusion, and that's why it sure seems that way. That whenever it comes to understanding about certain topics and everything, but really, the reason why you would plan ahead of time is because of that reason, though. But still, it's like you're always warned toward it. That whenever it comes to understanding about the fact that planning ahead of time, why do we make up plans ahead of time? But when things change, and like I say, and then you want to repeat that same question right here. Why do we even make plans ahead of time if things change? And so that's why it's like, why do we, or why do I, or why I'm like, So it's like, so every time we think about that, though, and a warrant to where that that whenever you go by the for what you were thinking about, by the thought, right, what you were thinking about, and then also by the fact is that knowing that that whenever you're thinking about that, and warned to where, hey, that whenever you do think about that, you think ahead of time, like 5 days ahead of time. And you're always warned to worry, okay, yeah, 5 days ahead of time. You think 5 days ahead of time. But still, but it sure seems that way that every time you think about that, though, it's like, really, should it really be about the fact about that you can remember that, you remember this or you remember that. And that's why it sure seems that way that, yeah, you remember this or you remember that, but really, what all has been getting done? What's the agenda here? And so that's why it sure seems that way that, yeah. The agenda. The agenda. The agenda would be a bias toward 5 days. 5 days. So it sure seems that way, all by testing your knowledge and all that, but half the time you're always want to know too that why if things change, why like why do you even plan ahead of time if maybe not everything is going to be set same according to that agenda toward that meeting at 5 o'clock or something like that, or you rejoin the meeting at 2 o'clock or something like that, and that's why it sure seems that way almost all the time that you're always wondering to where if things change, why do you even plan ahead of time? But it's like, well, really, that if you want to put it into a scenario, though, but, still, like, are we really going to think about that to where that, the things that have been accomplished, the things that have been done, and what have you learned based on that experience, right? And so, really, I really think that that's really the best answer that is whenever it comes to planning things ahead of time. So but the way I think about it too, that why do we even plan ahead of time, or what's the purpose to why we even plan ahead of time? Well, for the most part, is that just knowing about it, it's all about testing your ability and your knowledge for what you know, right? But anyway, talk about that. Talk about for why we do plan ahead of time, and whenever things change, and but a lot of parents might even say that why do we ask questions, or why should we ask questions that we don't want to know the answer to? That will we ask? You won't know. That's usually what I hear. That's usually what I hear. But then on the other hand too, but I am just concerned. I'm just concerned to ask, or something like, I am just asking, just because it came to my mind. So a lot of times it seems like, that's whenever a lot of the arguments come around. And I can be honest with everybody here too, that the arguments. Yep. You want to know too if that's supposed to be a chemistry question or anything, or if that's really supposed to be anything like a typical psychology and social worker. You always want to know too that the typical psychology and social work that you're always warned to where that whenever it comes to arguments that whenever it comes to understanding about that whenever you do think about a question, you want to think about a meeting or a discussion, right? And you're always warned to where that why is it that maybe people are going to be asking some personal questions, or maybe kind of getting nosy and asking just because that something of a concern on the matter or something about something like that. And so that's why it sure seems that way, that if that's really a part of the equation, or if that's really just a part of the scenario or the agenda or whichever. But you're always warned to where that whenever you do ask the questions, though, that it seems like that you are. I'm like, yeah, anything confidential or personal or anything like that. But a lot of times it seems like that toward it that whenever it comes to understanding about whenever you're trying to put this idea into a question, no, and you're always warned to where that that really that why is it that you ask the questions even though you may already have the answer to that question? You may not even need to know the answer to that question or something like that. So that's why it sure seems that way, that a lot of the simple questions are not really going to be answered very simple into a simple answer. And that's why it seems like that you're always warned to where that you get into these discussions a lot of times and thinking is that hey, that every time you think about that, though, that there's going to be an argument, or maybe there's going to be what you call this back and forth conversation. And that's why it seems like that you're always warned toward it. Planning ahead of time, would that give you what you call a peace of mind toward it? Whenever you do plan ahead of time, that gives you enough time to kind of keep that in mind about what the possibilities of happening, and also about is toward it that's just something to where just to kind of be alert about what possibly could happen in case if something goes wrong. That it could all. It's another way of how do you want to cause is to where that you're being alert about something to possibly for what can go wrong, what could what you should do in case of this happens, in case of that happens. And so a lot of things that I'm like, so yeah, so it sure seems that way, that every time you think about that, though, and you're always warned to where that you have a meeting talking about something, and you're always warned to where that what does that have anything to do with what we're talking about, or what does that have anything to do with this discussion and all that. But at the time, it seems like that, if we were to actually think about that, your 5 days in between time, that gives, I'm like, that's, if there's 7 days in a week, and you're always warned to where that your 5 days, that sometimes it's even 2 weeks, and you're always warned to where that really that gives you that still gives you enough time to do the things that you were trying to work out and arrange and all that. But still, you're always warned to where that it started out as a complete sentence before it actually was narrated into a question. And that's why it sure seems that way, that every time we think about that, and you're always warned to where that I don't get it. It's not explained very well. Well, I don't understand. What do you mean? And so that's why it seems like that. The first conversation started out with the fact about that. Simple question, simple answer. Round one. Round two. Yeah, and a lot of times everybody else might even say that. It all goes by round one and round two or something like that. Round. It's all about the round. Round one. Round one, but then round two is going to be, cycle one, cycle two. So it's like, so it's like, it's all about the challenge, right? And a lot of times it seems like, it's all about the challenges. And so that's why it seems like that every time you think about that, though, and you're always warned to where if there's really a right or wrong answer about a lot of things that you're working on. But every time you think about that, though, and you're always warned to where that it goes by the difficult challenges, to where that really that you get mad about it, mainly about the fact about after you talk about something for the first 5 minutes, and let's just say that person's gonna say is to her, I don't get it. Like, what don't you get? Like, well, yeah, I don't understand. Well, I don't get it. I don't get it. Yeah, I don't get it. I don't get it. And so let's just say that, I'm like, yeah, is that really a complete sentence right there? You go ahead and put like parentheses right there and put a question mark right there. Like, I don't get it. And then, or you put, a lot of times it's yeah, comma and then question mark or something like that. Comma, question mark. And that's why it sure seems that way, that every time you think about that though, and you're always wearing O2, that really that you're always worried to where that that you don't think about it. And yeah, and so a lot of times it seems like it's all about you until now. Yeah, until now. You didn't think about it until now. So you want to know too that you want to put that into like a data science type of equation right there. That you didn't think about that until now. And if you want to put that into like a word problem even. And so you're always worried to where that every time you think about something, and it's like that's the type of that's just the way how the brain works a lot of times, right? So every time you think about that though, and you're always worried to where that things that just come to your mind, like, yeah, whenever you do test your knowledge about a lot of things, and you're always worried to where that whenever you do start talking about stuff, and that's maybe another reasons why they say that it's important to take down notes about the things that you're talking about, right? But a lot of times it seems like that you start remembering things, and you just start asking the questions. And that's why it sure seems that way, that if you give your mind at least 5 days ahead of time, think about that. 5 days ahead of time will give you enough time to kind of refreshing your memory, and just kind of refreshing the questions the things that you want to talk about. And what are the higher, what is the higher solution of you taking care of a problem than compared to the things that have not been done at all. And so that's why it seems like that every time you think about that, and you're always worried to where that maybe that's one of that may be another reasons why a lot of doctors and researchers would maybe say that a lot of this knowledge would probably be recorded like it would be rendered on an Excel file or something like that, just because of that reason, is that they're just trying to study and just testing about what's been going on, and what the results are and all that. So that's why it sure seems that way, that every time you think about that though, and always want to know too, that you put that into a complete sentence, but then it winds up being translated into a question, and then paraphrase that into somebody else asked the same question, or round one and round two, that it gets a little bit more complicated. And that's why it sure seems that way, that every time you think about that, and you're always worried toward it, that you're always worried toward it, that whenever it comes to understanding about testing your knowledge and your ability to the things that you're trying to understand on trying to do, right? And that's why it seems like that when we think about that, why do we make plans ahead of time, but when things change, it's like it's all about testing, right? So that's why it's like I'm sure everybody else would like to have the answer to that question, but still, it's like you're always worried toward it. Did you really get a response about that? Or if anything, it's all about the fact about they give yourself, like, 5 days. It's all measured by 5 days, right? 5 days. And but that's the way I think about it. But anyway, thanks for watching, everyone, and have a great day.